I have to leave you soon if I'm to make the most of my life on Earth. I'm afraid I'm just gonna have to skip town. While I've had plenty to keep myself entertained, this body just isn't suitable for a run-in with the police. It's only a matter of time until some nosy neighbor thinks to pick up the phone. With the humidity over the last few days, Mummy and Daddy are already pretty ripe. Here's something you have to understand. Hell is a big place. I've given you fair warning about a few locations I myself have run into, and that'll have to do. Even if I wrote a library's worth of novels solely dedicated to mapping out the distinct locations within Dis, I still couldn't tell you everything about the city. But what I can do is give you a bit of information about the damned. So let's talk about the Slaughterman. Take a moment to think about all the celebrities you know. How many of them do you reckon would do well in Dis? Not many, I'd wager. Perhaps none. Fame and fortune on Earth doesn't count for shit when you're dead. Very few people are strong enough, mean enough, and downright psychotic enough to earn a reputation in hell. Those few who have what it takes are people you never want to meet. The Slaughterman is one of Hell's legends. He's a huge, bearded man with filed teeth, bloodshot eyes, and foam from his lips. Rumor has it that the day he first emerged from a birthing sack, he was unlucky enough to land at the feet of a slaver trade. Well, those tribesmen, they chuckled to themselves and readied their clubs and whips, only too happy to take some fresh meat captive. Outnumbered 12 to 1, naked, unarmed, and brand new to Hell, most people wouldn't stand a chance. If you believe the stories, the Slaughterman shrugged off the clubs battering against him and the whips cutting into his flesh as if they were nothing more than insect bites. He picked up the first slaver, put his hand into the man's mouth, and ripped his jaw right off of his skull. He moved on to another, and another, just tearing them apart with his bare hands until the survivors turned and fled. Nobody quite knows for sure who he was in life. I've heard theories, though, the most popular one being that he was the berserker of Stamford Bridge. Supposedly a single Viking held up the English army single-handedly. It didn't matter that he could never win, that he was outnumbered and that his enemies had better weapons and armor. He stood on that bridge and he fought. By the time he was brought down, he'd killed no less than 40 men. Now, I don't know how true any of this is. I've never seen the Slaughterman for myself, and to be quite honest with you, I don't fucking want to. What I can tell you, though, is that people don't become legendary in Hell without a good reason. I guess that the only one who knows the truth is the Slaughterman himself, and he isn't saying anything. Since the day he arrived in Hell, he's only spoken once. The fleeing slavers heard it as the Slaughterman tore their tribe apart. Naked, bloody, and surrounded by corpses, the Slaughterman looked up to the storm-racked sky and bellowed a single word. Valhalla. How about a little story? See, I wasn't new to Hell at this time. I'd made myself some clothes and a wooden club, found shelter, had a big slab of meat roasting over a campfire. The only thing I didn't have was a tribe. The area I'd been birthed in seemed slummy even for Dis, all half-collapsed hovels and mud huts. Iron was scarce, barely enough to make myself a water bowl. All in all, not a good spot for a tribe. My plan, though, was simple enough. I'd have a decent meal, carve myself a shiv or two in case I lost my club, and then find somewhere more or less dry to sleep. After that, I'd set off to look for a tribe. Even the mildest tribal initiations result in a few scars and a broken nose, so I wanted to be as well rested as I could be. Sleep in Hell is both vital and dangerous. There's a knack to finding somewhere that's simultaneously sheltered and hidden, with access to an escape route. Even then, you could never get more than a few hours of sleep at a time. In Hell, the slightest suspicious noise should scare the shit out of you. And a low, throaty growl definitely counts as a suspicious noise. I leapt out of my impromptu nest of skins and wood, raised my club up, and returned the growl with one of my own. A woman had crept into my building and was staring at me with dilated pupils. She looked to be in a bad way, skinny, naked, and covered with weeping sores, her lips peeled back to reveal several broken and jagged teeth. It took me all but a second to size her up. She'd been living rough for a few days, or weeks. Judging from her protruding ribs and bloated stomach, she was well on her way of dying of starvation. So she was weak, hungry, and didn't even have a weapon. And I told her, I said, "I've already eaten." So I relaxed, gave my club a few practice swings, but I said, there's no sense in letting her go to waste. I took a step towards her and she just bolted, just turned right around and scampered away in a strange animal gait. And I took off after her, certain that I could outpace her. Even if there wasn't much meat on her bones, bones can still be useful. I chased her through a few streets, struggling to keep my footing on muddy ground, and when I finally got close enough to swing my club, she stopped dead. The suddenness just caught me off guard, and I tripped over, losing my club as I fell. And she howled in triumph, a sound that was echoed by a dozen other throats. That day, I learned two things about hellhounds. The people who lose their minds and become a little more than beasts after enduring centuries of hell. Well, firstly, they have the necessary animal cunning to hunt as a pack. Secondly, human teeth and fingernails are perfectly capable of ripping flesh off of a bone. Modern doctors rarely thrive in hell. Academia and reliance on technology don't leave you in the best state to endure the endless violence and brutality. There are exceptions, though. The people who learn to sew their friends back together amid the machine gun fire of the Somme, shamans, witch doctors, and holy men who endured famine and warfare, and survivalists who knew how to cauterize their own wounds in the middle of a forest. Those are some of the people that just might be strong enough to ply their trade to the damned. After all, working knowledge of basic medicine is just one of those things that's a little beyond the meatheads roaming dis. Most of hell's surgeons find a tribe as soon as they're able. Their tools might be crude, but they soon learn to make do. Flint, slate, and shards of glass serve as their scalpels. They make thread from human hair and needles from slivers of iron. Whenever a member of a tribe has an infected sore, a surgeon will be the one to drain the pus. A tribal surgeon could save your life, but they'll do it without anesthetic. Then there are the freelance surgeons, the people who try to go it alone. They make themselves uniform, the theory being that the damned will recognize them if they all look alike. It doesn't really work, but then you can't expect much from logic from people who've lost count of how many times they've died. For one thing, fashions change over time. You see, I'm told that freelancers wore headdresses and bone necklaces at one point. The current trend is to mimic Venetian plague doctors by donning a beaked mask and wearing a long coat of fire-blackened skin. Freelancers are rare. They're very rare, in fact. You'll see thousands of damned for every freelance surgeon you come across. And when you do come across one, be fucking careful. Firstly, surgeons don't get a free pass in hell. The damned are more likely to attack a freelancer than they are to barter their tools, clothes, or slaves in exchange for their services. You can't be certain if a man in a bird mask and a black coat is really a surgeon or somebody who murdered a surgeon and took his clothes. Perhaps they made the outfit themselves in order to draw on the weak and the wounded close. Advertising doesn't always work as well as intended in dis. If the freelancer turns out to be genuine, that does not give you an excuse to drop your guard. Freelance surgeons aren't usually the most stable people. Put another way, freelancers are usually sadistic. Sure, they might stitch you back together and send you on your way. They might also decide it would be more interesting if they stitch you to someone else. They might think paying an arm and a leg for their service should be taken literally. They might turn out to be some wannabe serial killer who's yet to find their way to Skin Street. For each freelancer trying to do a tough job in a tougher place, there are a dozen or so Joseph Mangelas who want to try out their toys on somebody too injured to fight back. Stick with your tribe surgeon, if you're lucky enough to have one, that is. Failing that, learn to patch up your own wounds. Trust me, if you're able to read, you've already got the intellectual advantage over most of Hell's residents. Universal education is pretty recent after all. Freelancers just aren't worth the risk. I'm gonna be honest with you here. I don't actually know if these exist. Cambions, they're called. What I'm going to tell you is something that somebody else told me. It's up to you to decide if it's true or not. Personally, I really fucking hope it isn't. You see, people rape one another in hell. It happens a lot. If you're not strong enough, it'll happen to you too. The good news for ladies out there is that damned men fire blanks. You'll almost never get impregnated. I say almost never because, if you believe the stories, there is an incredibly slim chance that a couple of those swimmers will be awake and looking for an egg. Just to put this into perspective, we're talking conjoined twins level of unlikeliness here. And that's just conception. The chances of a pregnant woman surviving the full 9 months in hell, probably conjoined triplets level of unlikely. You're talking about a perfect storm of beating the odds here. There's that little thought experiment about the monkey randomly smashing keys on a typewriter that'll eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare in order if it goes at it for eternity. The result of that perfect storm, of those monkeys with their typewriters, is what people will call a cambion, a child conceived and born in hell. Now, I'm not saying they exist. I'm only saying that I met someone who swears it's true and that they've seen a cambion for themselves. You see babies in their birthing sacks from time to time. Usually it's just a body. Occasionally you'll see one drowning. Most of the damned ignore them. They wouldn't survive a day on the streets if you could afford to devote your full attention to them. Better to just leave them be. The only really fucked up people cut through the sacks and, well, I'm not going to finish that thought. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So this cambion, who may or may not have existed, apparently looked like a normal child. It cried, it shat, it sucked its mom's tits, just like a regular baby would. The mother was a part of a tribe, and they'd been able to protect her throughout her pregnancy. Couldn't tell you why. Curiosity, perhaps? Well, when it was born, the whole tribe gathered around to have a look. Among them was the man who told me this story. Somebody I'd meet years later and eventually kill. This man cut the baby's cord and lifted it to his face. Every man in the tribe had raped the mother at one point or another, and he wanted to see if the child looked anything like him. The cambion looked like a normal child in every way but one. Its eyes were dead. Lifeless. Like a doll's. Sure, the kid was alive. It wriggled and cried like a normal baby. Those eyes were open, though. Not scrunched closed like a newborn's baby's eyes should be. Wide open. Empty. Doll's eyes. If that story is true, I don't blame the tribe for killing the child. Something like that just shouldn't exist. Right. I'm done. I have to go. This is the point where people like to have things nicely tied up. A few dragons slain, a few maidens saved. At the very least, you could expect some kind of moral lesson to think it over. I think that, in this case, that sort of thing misses the point. There are no dragons to slay, no morals to learn. We don't live happily ever after. In hell, the dragons are tortured, and the maidens are raped. There's no grand revelation, no clever twist, no purpose, no redemption, no hope. There is only eternity among our own kind.